Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Hail to our gods and goddesses. Hail to our ancestors. Hail to those who walk with us. Hail to those who support us. Hail to all of our spirits. Hail to those in the skies, those who guide the ships, those who bring dreams, those who bring stories. Hail to all of our spirits who support us and walk with us. Come with us on this day. Come with us and share. Come with us and celebrate. Vesluha.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 128 with my good friend and co-hosts, Snow and Emily Streaking Fate. How are you all doing tonight?
I am good, thank you. It's nice to have this time to sort of catch up with each other. I mean, we've had some great guests on, and looking forward to hearing what you guys have been up to. How about you, Emily?
I'm doing well. Tired, got back from my trip visiting family in Nebraska a couple of days ago. That was very good but intense. Interesting in the idea of omens, because I saw a lot of vultures during a short trip. And I came back and talked to Sarenth about it, and he reminded me that it might be a Netjeru, and I had some confirmation on that later on, so that's always fun. And then we saw some, I think they were hawks, when we went down to the shrines today. So I always appreciate the birdie messages, and those seem to be coming on more so. But I'm doing well. How are y'all?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. Intense couple of days at work, not in terms of the actual context of the days of work being intense, just long. 2 16-hour days back to back will do that to you. The last couple of days have been really good, though, in terms of getting my spiritual work done, my meditation work done, my cleansing daily work has really kicked up a notch lately. So I'm a lot more grounded, centered, and put together than I have been in previous weeks, and been able to kind of just deal with the long days a bit better than I have. I really enjoyed the eclipse, which I know we're going to get into in this episode, so I'm not going to wax on about that too much. But one of the things that I really appreciated was just the amount of time that I've had with my kids. And I think I mentioned this last episode, where it's just mind-blowing just how much my son is growing up. And it just keeps getting brought home again and again, because he went to a on-grounds open house for the local community college. And he set that up. The only thing he really needed was for one of the two of his parents to be there for it. So Silver Leaf ended up doing that, which was great. And so, yeah, it's just like, oh man, this kid's getting ready to go to college. We've done it with one. So yeah, that's mostly the summer. Oh, go
I
ahead.
think it was my granddad who used to say, it doesn't matter how many bricks you put on their head, they'll keep growing.
That's true. Oh
Yeah.
man. Oh man. It, not only is he taller than me, but he's got so much more of himself together than what I did at that age. It's so nice to see. So yeah, how about you? How about you, Snow?
Yeah. Just kind of been keeping on, been writing a lot, done a whole bunch of blog posts, got a few drafts sitting, waiting for different things. Um, been brushing up on sort of revisiting the Arbitel, which has been interesting, kind of getting into magic and things there. The eclipse happened, which I'm sure we'll get to. Um, what else? Attended a webinar on the lunar nodes. That was always interesting. And there was a really cool one. Was it last week or the week before now? That was being done in a series of things by this organization based in Greece, on Neoplatonism, and they had one on Hermeticism in Islam, which was really, really interesting.
Ooh.
Yeah, there seems to be this big push lately on accepting and exploring the influences of Islam and West Asia and North Africa on the occult in sort of the modern sort of occult world, magical world, pagan world, what have you, which is really cool and interesting to see. So yeah, it's what I'm doing.
So exploring things besides Theosophy and Blavatsky. I appreciate that.
Right, yeah. It's not just old white people kind of nicking stuff from Tibetans and yeah, kind of going, well, actually, let's go look at the people that they were stealing from.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So for those of us who don't know what the hell the Arbitel is, what the hell is the
Mm.
Arbitel?
So the Arbitel is like, well, I mean, it's like a magical grimoire. But the interesting thing about it, and I was reading some of Polyphony Samblock's sort of notes and comments on his site, um, is that whereas sort of what you think of as Solomonic magic or sort of that kind of high ceremonial thing, this is very much counter to that. So I've seen quite a few people sort of make the comparison of if Solomonic magic is like high Catholicism, where it's all very ceremonial, and there's all the robes and the candles and the precise timings and the fancy elaborate rituals. The Arbitel's like the Puritan Protestant, the kind of counter to that, which is really interesting. So it's very kind of utilitarian in a way. So it's kind of you've got your planetary spirits, and it's just a matter of having the sigil, reaching out on the day of the spirit, and that's pretty much it.
Oh, neat. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So it's really interesting.
I've heard about it, but it's been a really long time. So
Mm.
I appreciate the reminder and the summary.
And then so the rest of it is just talking about how the way to do that communication and stuff is more about being a good person and living a good life. And sort of that is going to appeal to the divinities and stuff, which is going to bring those spirits to you. So it's really interesting.
Oh, I can see why you said it's a more Protestant version
Right. Yeah.
of ceremonial magic. That's yeah,
Mm.
that definitely that tracks. Well, neat. I'm glad that you've been digging into that. And
Yeah.
I guess my question is because you've been writing so much on astrology and the intersection of your various paths, where do you see it slotting in at this point? Or is it going to?
Um, I mean, I think that's a good question. I mean, I suppose to a degree, kind of the multiplicity of gods and spirits and things applying to the same things.
Mhm.
So astronomically speaking, in space, we have one sun that this planet, this ball of that rock is going around. But mythically speaking, or cosmologically speaking, that sun can be more than one god, or connected to more than one god or spirit, or what have you. And so you could view the Arbitel, even though it is sort of in that broad, loose genre of kind of Renaissance grimoires, you could kind of view the 7 spirits in that as connecting to, say, the 7 Egyptian planetary deities or something, and kind of connect it that way. If you didn't want to go with a more kind of pure sort of mystical Christian take.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. My mind
Mm.
immediately went to the Kemetic viewpoint and having that as this planet spirits. That's really interesting. I'm excited to see where you go with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean I think in broader overculture, when we think of Saturn now, we think ball of rock with the ring around it. We don't think of the fact that Saturn is also the name of the god Saturn. And it's kind of that works the whole way down.
Yeah,
So
I have
it's
a new deck that has the like an alchemical theme. And I knew that when I got it, but then it didn't like quite sink in. So I'm interested in working with it and seeing like connecting with the planets as spirits in addition to the gods associated with those planets. Like Mercury. It's interesting to see the different energies.
right. I mean, when I was watching that lecture on sort of Hermeticism in Islam the other week, at the end of it, I'll have to look up the name of the presenter and we'll put it in the show notes or something maybe. But at the end of it, he did a Q&A, and I said, well, your specialism is in Ottoman philosophy, and this is very much talking in the realm of sort of mystical esoteric Islam. But this is also in a block of lectures on Neoplatonism, and we're looking at Hermeticism, which has its roots in Greco-Egyptian polytheism. Can you see traces of that polytheism or paganism in what you're looking at with Hermeticism and Islam? And his answer, which I thought was really interesting, was, well, first and foremost, Islam is monotheistic and always will be. But, and I was like, this is interesting. He said, if you look at something like the Picatrix, the way that they're discussing the planets and describing the planets, you could interpret them as having a degree of agency in their own right, with the qualifier that they are channeling God above that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, depending on how you frame that, you could either say that was a Hermetic God or, you know, Christian Islamic God, and it's kind of interesting that way. We got deep really quick here.
It's something I find really, really interesting, and it's been a while since I've dug into it much, but it has kind of come back into my life a little bit more. So I'm very excited to read what you end up writing about it.
Yeah, fucking nerds.
I'm sorry, how many versions of the Eddas have you read at this point?
Enough.
Yeah.
Okay, two alchemy and astrology are so not my bag. I'm glad it's yours, because every time I've had somebody explain it to me, I know my eyes glass over, and it's not because what you're saying isn't profound. It's because I hear it and I go, that's great. I'm so happy you're excited about this thing. And then I start thinking about the math, or I start thinking about all the intricacies involved in alchemy or with astrology, or the intersection between them, and I mean, I got that even looking in Culpepper's fucking herbal, and I'm like, cool, this herb I really like is Venusian. Okay, great. And I know from what I've read, like for instance, I'm talking about mugwort, so Artemisia vulgaris. I know that it does have impact on menstruation, and can also be a possible, depending on how you take it and in what dose, it can be an abortifactant. So I know partly why they're looked at as Venusian influences, but it's still just like there's such, I mean, and that's just a surface level reading of a very popular herbal manual from the 1800s. And then you start talking about the Picatrix and Arbitel, and I had a couple of bloggers who I used to follow that would do deep dives in the Picatrix, and my brain would get blasted out the back of my skull, just kind of like peering over their shoulder. So it's really neat that you both are like knee deep in this shit, because
I am not knee deep. I am like, I just dip my toes in sometimes.
okay. Well, even that much is still a bit much for me. And it's part of it is I know where my limits are. And this is definitely a hard limit for me because I've tried approaching alchemy in a couple of different contexts, and I've tried approaching astrology in a couple of different contexts. And every time I do, it's like almost like either my brain is just not processing what's in front of me, because I can understand like calcification, for instance, or why you're devoting so much time to getting to the salt of the thing. I can intellectually grasp it, but putting my hands around it, it constantly slips out. And I'm not sure if it's my spirits. I'm not sure if it's me. It's probably a combination of the two. I'm pretty sure at this point. But it's just such a slippery subject for me that I am in awe when people like do deep dives on it. So I love watching your blog for this shit, because every time you dig into this and you find a new way to bring your different paths together with it, I'm like, that's amazing. So beyond my ken, but that's amazing.
So what you're saying is your limit is the sublunary realm.
What? I am beneath the moon. Sure, we'll call it that. Woo!
I mean, I always think it's interesting when people point out how much of kind of that ancient astrology that was very much in that culture still exists in our language today without us necessarily realizing. Like if you think about Venus and you think about Venus's connections to sort of sex and fertility and things, it's not that long ago the common term venereal disease, like that's the connection.
Oh.
Yeah.
And when you think about the moon and different words for the moon, and you get to month, which is a lunar cycle roughly, and then you think about menstruation and menses lining up with that roughly, like these kind of connections, like, what is down here comes from what is up there, that whole interconnection of the cosmos. It's pretty nifty stuff.
Yes, I wish I had more of a head for it, but like I said, I'm in awe of people who appreciate things like astrology, alchemy, and statistics. Those things are just unknowns to me, because I managed to squeak by with a C- in my statistics course because I had to.
I mean, I failed statistics. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No,
I was going to say, I mean, I failed statistics, but that's because they introduced it into the curriculum halfway through my last year.
Jesus.
So no one passed that.
I was just going to say that it's a good thing to a certain extent that those do slip through your fingers so easily, Sarenth, because that frees up your headspace for other things. Like nobody is going to be great at everything, and realizing certain things that are not part of your direct path or maybe part of where you should put your energy frees up that energy to go more in depth in other areas.
Like if it's necessary to learn some kind of astrology for a thing I need to do, I'll do it. But I'm gonna have a shitload of references, because trying to keep that in my head is really, really hard.
I mean,
But
there's nothing wrong with looking stuff up.
It's just true. This is true.
Yeah. I mean, I say that when people start talking about getting into runes for the first time. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with keeping the poems open in another tab.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Like if you think you need to have everything memorized from day one, that's a very tough road you're trying to get onto.
Oh man, you want to talk about setting yourself up for failure?
Right.
I can't remember how many times it took me to intentionally say the names of Avaz and Ivaz and remind myself what they meant, because they look so similar. Or Avaz and Manas too.
Because then you get into astrology and you have, 7 planets and 12 signs and 12 houses and various combinations of all of those. And then you get the angles between everything. And if you thought runes was a lot,
right?
Good luck memorizing all of that.
What's the conjunction again? I just remember that from the Dark Crystal.
A conjunction is like an eclipse.
So
super close. they get super close.
How's that for a segue?
That's amazing.
That's
Right
a good
off the cliff.
segue. Yeah.
It's what you pay me for.
So, did you actually get to observe the solar eclipse?
I'm not here.
Yeah, because the path of totality is like right through the Midwest of the U.S. this time around.
The Atlantic was in the way.
Parts of the US, because I didn't really see it or notice it in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Beneath, like below, yes, and to the east, yes, but where I was, it didn't really get to see much, which was a little sad for me, but I have experienced a total eclipse before, so I've at least had that experience. I think if you can be in the path and experience it at least once, it is well worth it. What about you, Saranth?
I got to see it, I got to experience it, and I got to do it with my son, so that was awesome.
Nice.
I believe that's the first total solar eclipse I have been aware of and around for where I wasn't doing something during it. So, did I see it? Oh yeah, and it was wild because everything goes real quiet during the totality.
Mhm.
Like it was like I looked over and it was just my son and I in that stillness. It was buck wild. And as a kind of like backdrop, what we determined a couple of days before was we were going to start brewing mead the day of, and as a way of bringing our brewing back into the house because we haven't actually brewed any mead here. But we also did that the last time there was an eclipse. We brewed, and he made mead for Thor with oak chips in it, which came out really good. We ended up not only doing all the cleaning and the cleansing of the various carboys and all the this, that, and the other that needed to be cleaned, but during the actual eclipse, I got this big kick in the ass to make a sacred fire. So I'm sitting there with my flint and steel underneath as within about 15 minutes of the totality coming in, and I'm lighting the sacred fire, which was really neat because it's total darkness like all around you, and then it's like this little fire is building in the meantime. And he had these polarized lens glasses, little ones that you can look at the eclipse with safely. So him and I were swapping back and forth looking at the eclipse, which was really neat.
Stumbling around with your eyes shut, trying to find each other to pass them over.
So we'd be like shutting our eyes, handing over the glasses, and then looking down and opening them again. So, you're not sitting there baking the backs of your eyeballs.
Dad, where'd you go?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
We were also like sitting there slapping the lens on the face of our phones so we could actually take video of it without destroying the camera lens, which was really cool. We actually got to see some of the solar phenomena that was occurring as it happened. So there were these weird shimmering, looked like fireballs coming off the sides of it. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And he looks at it and he's like, whoa, that's weird. What is that? Come to find out later, there was a solar flare. And
Nice.
There's also a phenomena called a sundog, where it like the edge shimmers a bit. That's because it's literally like fire coming off the sides of the fucking sun. So you can see it during an eclipse. It's really wild. So that was especially because I'm sitting there and I'm feeling Hati in school, and I'm feeling Suna and Mani, and they're all together in this space. It's like, wow, oh, this is really boss. What the hell was that?
Now, did you have any like night animal sounds? Because in my past experience, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, like once it got dark, like owls started hooting and stuff. And I was in the middle of a somewhat wooded area, like a field surrounded by woods.
We've got an owl that lives near us, but I didn't hear him at all. But like during the totality, when it was pitch dark and everything was quiet, like we could see Riker in the window, and he was just like darting his head back and forth, like, what the fuck is this? Everything was dead silent. It was just buck wild because, like, not even 3 minutes before, birds were chirping, flying around, and then like, all right, what the hell? And everything's dead silence. It was really cool because all you could hear was the crackling of the sacred fire, and Brandon and I are just looking at each other like, this is really fucking cool.
Now the dog actually got scared, didn't he?
Yes, he got freaked because all of a sudden it's pitch dark and he's just like, why? And he's you can see him running back and forth from the window because we didn't want him outside at that point. We tried bringing him out with us to start with. I just remember this, and he got spooked. He was like, nope, no, it's getting too dark. I'm going in. What is this? So he opted to go back inside because we let him out and he went potty, and then he's like, I'm good. Bye.
Maybe he'd been brushing up on his Mesopotamian lore, saw the eclipse and went, the king's gonna die, I'm out of here. Civilization as we know it is ending. The sun has gone out. Bye, folks.
Right? Yeah, it was kind of wild because like he went from being really chill and just happy to be outside to nope, all my nope, get me out of here. It was, and then he sat the entire time and watched us out the window, but he didn't bark like he usually does, which was kind of interesting. He's like, no, I want to know where you are, but I sure as hell don't want to be out there with you.
Now, Snow, you didn't see it, but did you do any ritual or magical work during that time that you want to talk about?
I didn't on the day of the eclipse, but I did the day after the eclipse. So the Gothic heathenry tradition I'm part of, we observe the dark moon and the new moon. So, and some traditions and cultures historically do this, and some still do in other parts of the world. So the difference being the dark moon is when the moon isn't visible at all, and the new moon is that first sliver of moon. So that's generally the next day. So it is like the first part of the next moon. Dark moon, it's all dark, you can't see anything. So that's the differentiation there. Astronomically speaking, you'd say, well, the new moon is nothing, and then you get the first. So in the Gothic heathenry tradition I'm part of, we had the 3-day ritual, or 3 days of ritual, I should say, to celebrate the ending of the wild hunt proper, the coming of spring, the returning of Saul, the sort of solar goddess, and Garth, who leads the wild hunt, sort of retrieving her from the underworld as the year has come round. And so the fact that this lined up with a solar eclipse felt very kind of profound and prophetic and really, really cool, because that is sort of the myth and understanding we have for solar eclipses as well, is that union of Garth and Saul. So it's sort of in a way to how other cultures and mythologies view eclipses as sort of the copulation of the sun and the moon. So yeah, it was really cool. What about you guys?
On the day of the eclipse, it was the day before I left to fly back to Michigan. I didn't do any ritual. I did go to a local park and walk about 6 miles around a lake, partway around and then back. So I did a lot of walking and time outside. I did see an eagle towards the end, which was pretty cool. It felt the next day flying back was the start of a Kelley and Maddox is sharing a new novena on her Patreon, and so that was the first day of it. So I prayed the first day of that novena during my traveling. It felt to me like the day after the eclipse was more of a day of doing than the day of. And I don't know if that's just because I was traveling the day after. I don't think I did much more than travel and pray the novena, but it did feel, I felt more of a doing energy on the day after, which I thought was interesting. The day of was more of observance and a day of being, for lack of better wording. I know, Sarenth, you were very active with like your brewing and stuff. But you also were witnessing it directly, so that might have had a bigger impact.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, being in the path was really neat because you kind of can't ignore it. And I was honestly initially worried about how tired I was going to be because I believe it was what, a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
The
So
eclipse was Monday.
oh,
and then
okay, that's right. That's right. I took that day off, but I'd worked a double the day previous because I got stuck at work.
You
I
worked
had-
4 doubles, I believe, previous.
Yeah. I
So
worked-
4 double shifts, and then
Yeah, so I worked 4 doubles in a row more or less, and then on the end of that, I had actually taken the day off from work. I managed to get an A day, vacation day, and it's because I knew that my son and I were going to want to brew and we were going to want to hang out. And God knows I was going to get whacked on the other end of that. So, nah. It was nice. It was very. It was a lot for me. Just being spiritually aware during that time was one thing, but then going into ritual and hailing Suna and Mani and hailing the various gods, ancestors, and Vaitir, and just being very connected. And also keeping in mind, like, I had read about a week before that the Ojibwe people look at this as the meeting of Nokomis and Moshemis, and Nokomis is grandfather, Moshemis is grandmother, and so they understand the sun and the moon of grandfather, sun, grandmother, moon, and so according to this elder that was telling the story, we being the Ojibwe people, not me, avert our eyes because it's their private time to be together. Meanwhile, my son and I are staring up at the sun and the moon coming together, like, hi. But for us, that's when the wolves chase the sun and the moon, and they almost catch them. And so, I howled at one point, and it's just a very connective ritual, a very simple ritual. Nothing was really all that ornate about it. Just sitting with a sacred fire, inviting the fire back, inviting the sun back, and for the moon to take its course again. And to ask Heidi and Skull not to actually swallow them this time. Thanks, ever so. So for me, it was very much a rejuvenating ritual, a ritual of bringing things back, of bringing things forward. And combined with, we sat out with the totality until it was well and truly over and the sun had come back. And then we're like, okay, now we're going to go brew. It felt so good having done the cleansing, having done the physical cleaning, and having done all of the prep work. You just go in, heat up your water, and get your honey dissolved and start the brew process and bring new life out of this darkness. From not having a very highly planned ritual, it felt very great and very connective.
How very alchemical of you.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Celestially timed, you did ritual, you purified and prepared yourself, you got your ingredients, and then you brewed.
Yeah, I guess from that perspective, it was pretty alchemical, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Although it's funny because, like, I guess my perspective on alchemy is mainly through the lens of Kvasir and his being killed as part of the mead. And that I guess very alchemical process of the god who's formed from the spit of Asir and Vanir becoming part of the brew and everything else. So, like, we honor all of the gods that were part of making Kvasir, and then Kvasir themselves, and then the mead vitir, the bee vitir, the water itself, and the yeast spirits. So we do this whole like preparatory prayer thing as we're preparing the vessels and everything else. So yeah, I guess in retrospect it was a little more involved than what I thought it was. I guess I just didn't think about it like that.
So when am I going to start seeing Sarenth the Heathen Alchemist business cards?
Oh my God, no, I don't need that on top of everything else. Maybe if I get this brewing off the ground, we'll see what happens with that.
Because that sounds a lot like alchemy to me.
I found it very interesting that this was the time that you chose to start it, because I know you've been in this house for a couple of years, and that's been something that you've talked about continuously. And so it was very interesting to me that it was this eclipse that became the actual date that you ended up starting brewing again.
And what's really funny is Silverleaf was asking that our first brew be done with a very specific honey, which didn't end up making it in any of the meads this time around. But part of that is that it was 4 pounds of honey, or yes, 4 pounds of honey, and I do about 3 pounds to a gallon.
That's a cheap gallon.
I mean,
We'll let the Americans figure that one out for a sec.
right. So there it goes. It clicked. Thanks. Yes, smartass. Anyway, 3 pounds of honey to 1 gallon of mead is what my usual is. And these were quite the quantities I had were quite what I was hoping for. And actually, I'm sorry, it was not 4 pounds of honey for this special batch. It was 12, which is just fine if I'm doing a 4-gallon batch, but I have a 5-gallon carboy. So I'm like, okay, what can I mix this with? Or do I want to just do a drier mead? And I couldn't decide on it. So we're like, you know what? Let's just get these 3 gods taken care of, and then we can decide on the straight meads later. And so we ended up doing 1 for 4, which my son put together, and it had oak chips, about an ounce, and about an ounce of nettle. So it's coming out quite dark, and it's probably going to be somewhat dry. Because the last time he did this, that's what it ended up being. It's a really good mead, and I think we just polished off the last of it this previous year. But I love brewing. It's a fantastic thing, and I'm glad we finally did it, because like you said, I've been trying to do this damn thing for like 2 years running, and now of all times is when it happens. So
I was going to say, I'm sure on lots of past episodes of Around Grandfather Fire, you've been going, and maybe this upcoming full moon, new moon, next month, the holiday, summer, spring, winter, we'll finally get to
it. I think part of it was just I thought I had more time than what I did, but also it just wasn't the right timing. Just wasn't the right timing. Just wasn't the right timing. Now, granted, I would really like to not be so hidebound to timing that I can only breed during the fucking eclipse, which I don't think is the thing going forward, but it's a very interesting tie between the old house and the new house. Ritually speaking, that was the last time that my son and I brewed mead, and that's the last time I brewed anything at all. So that's interesting.
I mean, they are the kind of thing that happens more often than people realize. It's just not necessarily to that degree, and not necessarily somewhere we're going to see it.
No, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, like Mercury retrograde happens, 4 times a year? Happens quite often, I feel like. But I thought it was interesting that the eclipses happened during Mercury retrograde this year. And I was curious if that affected things for people or not.
I mean, I definitely think the solar eclipse happening in Aries, I've seen a lot of people with lots of pent-up frustrated energy and no outlet for it. Because Mercury goes retrograde, that communication's gone down, people aren't making sense of, there's a lot of people charging into walls trying to figure out what's going on, and sitting at home with lots of energy and no outlet for it, that kind of thing. I've been seeing a lot of that around.
How long does that last? That particular thing with Aries.
Well, I mean, eclipse season is normally kind of a couple of weeks either side of the actual event itself. I will fill time while I look up an ephemeris to find out when exactly we transition out of Aries. Because it shouldn't be too long now because we are, yes. Talk amongst yourselves.
So with Mercury in retrograde, I know we've explained this on the show before. What additional bearing would Aries have on that besides the frustration building and the pent up feelings? Because I think Aries is more than just raw or smash Hulk, right?
Well, because Aries is, it's a cardinal sign, so it's initiating, it's beginning things. It's the trigger. It's a fire sign, and it's whether you want to use the word masculine or outward or however you want to phrase that, sort of the analogy of that image of the ram, but the ram is just charging ahead no matter what happens, and it's either going to hit the thing or it's going to go through it. And if it hits the thing, it's going to get back up and carry on charging anyway. The astrologer Rick Levine, who's got loads of Aries placements on his chart, is famous for saying that Aries is shoot then aim.
That's what
Sounds
tracer
pretty
rails are
accurate.
for.
Yeah. There you go. The 20th, the sun will move into Taurus. So
Okay.
that's not too long now. It's the 14th here, 13th there, as we're recording now.
So, what would be a good use of the energy of this time then? If there's all this pent up energy and all this, I'm going to be a dude, bro, and I'm going to keep hitting that wall till it moves or I do. What's a good outlet for all this shit?
Well, I mean, Aries, that's lots of fiery energy, and Aries is also a sign ruled by Mars. And if you think Mars, martial, all those kinds of aspects, so physical exercise, take up a martial art, go for a run, throw some weights around, anything like that's going to be good, physically getting moving, getting that energy out there, doing something with that. And if you are experiencing that frustration, that's going to be a good outlet for that anyways, whether you're kind of seeing the astrology of it or not.
Yeah, I always see like Mercury retrograde as a really good time to reassess and reorganize. So like if you have a lot of pent up Aries energy, like reorganizing, rearranging, if you can direct it to ideas without actually maybe starting, but like what you might want to start planning a bit.
No,
But physical activity is a really good outlet for Aries stuff.
I'm vaguely remembering, is Aries the first sign in the zodiac?
Yes.
Okay. So if you actually want to like put wheels on something and get things moving along, now is the season.
Right. And solar eclipse is also, as I said, that is the new moon.
Mm.
So we're at a new lunar cycle. We're at the start of the zodiac again. So astronomically, this is the new year.
Gotcha.
So it's a good time for beginnings. And I mean, the interesting thing about retrogrades is, and it's kind of become a sort of pop culture meme, oh no, Mercury's in retrograde, the sky's going to fall or whatever. But I mean, to Emily's point, it happens so many times a year that if every time it was absolutely catastrophic, we'd all be completely traumatized by now. And the other thing is, if you have a Mercury retrograde or a Venus retrograde in your natal chart, then having them retrograde again can actually be beneficial for you,
Mm.
Yeah.
which
I've
is,
known some people
yeah.
that it's extremely beneficial when they have them in their natal chart, and it's like their favorite times of year.
So if you have it going direct, which means it seems to be going forwards in your birth chart, then it going retrograde, which means it seems to be going backwards, can reverse the impacts of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if in your birth chart it is retrograde, and then as it's moving around, it goes retrograde, that is aligning with your birth chart. So that can actually be complementary for you.
Okay. What does that mean?
So I mean, direct and retrograde is which direction it appears to be going in from how we're looking at it here.
Right, but when you say complementary, that's what I'm getting
Right.
at.
So if it was more harmful or more complicating than Mercury going retrograde being a negative thing could be the technology is not working, your internet keeps cutting out, you can't verbalize a thought, people aren't listening to what you're saying, or you're not listening to what they're saying, you're missing each other in conversation. It being complementary means your internet connection is fantastic and you can't quite explain why things are clicking when you're sitting in lectures and people are saying things where they hadn't before. You sit down with your partner and you're actually really hearing each other and verbalizing what's going on in a really sort of good way, that kind of thing.
Okay. So it's not anything that you necessarily have to do yourself. I mean, you could do stuff, but it's a good time to have things pick up and go the way that you need them, is basically what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Sarah has learned some astrology.
Whether or not he
Ask about
retains
that.
it.
That's
I was
all
gonna
right.
say, so we'll check in an hour and see. But it's good. Learning is good.
It's all right. We already said you're allowed reference material and notes.
Very true.
There is no
I really
test.
Oop, hang on.
I really enjoy Mercury retrograde because I appreciate the time that I feel able to pause and shift directions to something that is more with alignment of where I want to go. Like I see it as a very nice time to kind of move things a little bit. I have noticed around me that people tend to have more car issues the last couple years during Mercury retrograde. I know that can be a thing, but it could also be that I just happen to be noticing it during that time. But personally, I tend to really enjoy Mercury retrograde because I feel like it gives me a time to pause and think about things a little bit more. Now, my sun sign is a Taurus, so I'm very excited that this is happening right before Taurus season too.
Yeah, it's one of those things where looking to precedent can really help and sort of see patterns, especially historically. And to your point as well, there is also the factor that perhaps we should never really rule out, which is if you're aware of it, you can then be looking for it. So then you kind of have to take that step back, compare notes with other people and say, is this aligning what you're thinking? Is this aligning with your experiences? Or am I wanting to see this and therefore finding it? Which I mean, we see in sort of spirit work and divination and stuff generally anyways.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because like, is it that the Mercury retrograde is affecting you, or are you just paying attention?
Right. It's
I
like
also look. Go ahead, Snow.
Nope.
I was gonna say I also look at whether or not it matters. Like if I decide to take a little bit more of care coming up to Mercury retrograde about making sure that car stuff is in order, or internet stuff or other things are in order coming up to Mercury retrograde, that's going to be a net positive effect, whether or not Mercury retrograde is actually more likely to cause issues with my car. So I take note of when that it might be Mercury retrograde that's causing those issues. It might not be.
Right.
But if the net effect is just that I'm a little more aware of how I might prevent issues, then I think it's a net positive.
I find it interesting that our mechanics this Mercury retrograde season completely burned out 3 transmissions before they could get to your car. The poor mechanic that we go through, who was awesome, they had a semi they had to move as part of their job, and it was stuck in a ditch, and the first one trundled up to the scene and proceeded to blow the transmission out, trying to haul this poor bastard out of the ditch. Not a problem. We've got 3 more trucks, or 2 more trucks, excuse me, at this point. Sent the second one, blew the transmission trying to drag the first one out. Sent the third one. Croaked the transmission, trying to drag the other two out. So, even if it's not affecting you personally, like it'll affect, it sounds like it'll affect the orbit around you just fine.
I know I was having a conversation with my partner the other day where I was saying, I think people forget when you get divination more broadly, things aren't necessarily about you, they can be about things around you. So I mean, to sort of, I guess, connect the last 2 points we've had. If you were to do a tarot reading and someone pulled the tower, now does the tower mean things are going to go horrifically because you've been told when the tower comes up that's a bad sign? Or, it might not be. And whether it does or not, is whatever the tower has been pulled for going to apply to you, or is it going to apply to someone in your vicinity? Yeah.
So that's actually a really good point. So with people doing these rituals, celebrating these holidays, and embracing all this meaning, whether or not you see the solar eclipse, it's still affecting you. I mean, and this is just surely a total solar eclipse for us here in the States, as it is for somebody across the pond, as it is on the opposite side of the world from us, period. So when it comes to ritual timing, I guess that's another thing that I'm curious about, whether we're looking at it through the alchemy lens or lunar solar lens or what have you. I guess like ritual timing in general is such an interesting thing for me, because a lot of times I'm just like, catch as catch can. And I sometimes find it was a really good ritual timing after I've done it. Which I know probably isn't the way that a lot of folks would advise I do ritual, but it just seems to happen that way more often than not, that this is the time I've got available, let's go. And it turns out, like, after the fact, oh, it was this planetary hour in this sign in this day. Cool. That's great. And I guess, have you noticed that there is a big difference between ritual timing that you intentionally plan for versus not? Or is it like the building up of meaning is what matters here? Or is there a difference?
I mean, I think for myself, I mean, by and large, I do ritual when I think to do ritual and when I have time to do ritual and chants and whatnot. Because I am also a person who lives in a world and we have a society and we have things to do and there are days N, E, and Y and coffee runs out. But I think when I have managed to time it astrologically or to a designated day on a calendar for whatever reason, I think you get this sense, whether you want to say it's psychological or whether you want to say it is something more profound and bigger than that, you get this sense of connection. Now, whether that's connection to people celebrating the same thing at the same time in other places, or whether that's connection to kind of the cosmos because you've done it, where the planets have aligned a certain way or whatever, I think that can be really profound and powerful and emotive in and of itself. Timing rituals like that is by far the least common way that I do that, just because of sort of the practicalities of finding time to do ritual. But I do think it has that really sort of profound impact.
I would say I also tend to catch as catch can, but I agree with what Snow said. And I think even if you are doing ritual on a day where ritual has been done like the year before or the same day over years, there's a buildup of that community energy, whether you're the one that does it on that day every year or whether different civilizations over time have done it, like with the cycles of the moon or the sun, have done it on that day. And again, it might be that at certain times there's extra connections with divinities and spirits. And it might be that people doing it it's just building upon that. I think there's the same kind of building with written prayer. When you're saying a prayer that has been said by others, there's that buildup of energy that you're kind of tapping into. And I think choosing the days of your ritual or the timing of your ritual can be similar to that.
I mean, I think there's also consideration of frequency of ritual here, and also how used to doing ritual you are. So I think if you were completely a newcomer to these traditions, these religions, these practices, I think worrying about when will be the preferable time to do it, I don't think that should even be a factor at that point, because you're still trying to figure out the shape of the ritual, the vague outline of what you want to do. And then you can start getting into the details, and then you can get into the whens and the hows and the whys once you've got the basic what down. But I think once you start to get into that, then thinking about timing it can be really sort of powerful and effective, because you get that sense of sort of rhythm and rhyme to it, and that sense of connection. But then you also have to consider what is a sustainable frequency. So if you're going to do it, I don't know, every new moon, is that going to be close enough together for it to feel like you have a practice? Maybe, maybe not. It might be something sustainable and regular so that you can fall into that rhythm and it works for you. If you're going to do ritual, every time the planetary hours of Mars, then you're going to be doing ritual at really weird hours all the way through every day of the week, So then you get these different kinds of things to consider. And it's working towards having a sustainable practice that you can actually sort of keep on top of. But then also with that, allowing yourself that grace room so that if you miss a day for whatever reason, or you timed a ritual for a point, but then in reality that's at 2 a.m. and you've just finished a really long work day and you've got a work day first thing in the morning, maybe not, maybe go for whatever the next best thing is and make those sacrifices to work around that.
So if the ritual is not going to work in terms of timing, are there ways that you can bring those astrological influences in so that if the physical timing is just simply not going to happen because it's at 2 a.m. and you have work at 7, is there a way of bringing that astrological influence in that you're looking for?
I mean, whenever you're doing, so the branch of astrology where you're picking dates, you're electing dates, it's electional astrology. So that's when you're picking dates and times to do things. Generally, whether that's when I'm going to buy a house, when would be a good time to move, when do we want to have our wedding, when do I want to do a ritual, all those kinds of things all fall into that same framework. And there are always pros and there are always cons, and you always have to be realistic and practical about it. And so you have a given window of time you want to look in. So you'll say, oh, I want to do this, and it's going to be within the next, 3 months. Well, you kind of have to work with the astrological weather that you've got in that 3 months and just pick whatever kind of, either whatever the best option is or whatever the least worst option is going across that. And you kind of then have to start prioritizing and say, well, if we want to focus on Mercury being there, then maybe I have to ignore whatever Mars is doing over here, because we got to prioritize that.
I keep thinking about what Saranth said about having the perfect timing, but not realizing it until after the fact. I keep thinking about him having like spirits that are calculating the planetary hours and then nudging him when it's time. Be like, hey. But yeah, because there's always so many different influences, I think perfect timing is sometimes perhaps never like possible. It's like, what is the best timing that works for you within your life, within this period, within these influences, and then getting as much support, whether from your spirits, from your friends, from whatever during that period of time to do what you're trying to do.
I mean, it's kind of like if you decide you want to offer one specific, loaf of bread or one specific beer when you're doing a ritual, And you know it's really popular. So as soon as the shop opens, they're going to go flying out off the shelves. So you have, you know, maybe half an hour to get in there ahead of the rush. And you know the shop doesn't open until, you know, 8 o'clock or whatever. So you have that window. And if you get there before, nothing's happening. You get there after, you missed your chance. You have to do without to get the next best thing. And I think a lot of this is really like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I know I get frustrated when I plan to do a ritual at a certain time and it doesn't work out. But I do still get more out of doing that ritual with modifications that work as opposed to not doing that ritual at all because the perfect timing or the perfect setup has passed.
I think it's very much a case of it's better to do something than nothing. And so it's just working out, you know, how much leniency you're going to allow yourself and how much leniency you're going to have with the thing that you set out to do. Sort of the first thing that springs to mind is when people talk about, you know, taking up yoga or doing meditation, something like that. And they go, oh, well, if I do meditation then the kids are playing in the next room and that's really off-putting. Or if I do meditation here, then, you know, and it's kind of, okay, but that's also the reality that you're living in. And these are the things that you're taking up this practice to try and manage better. You can't remove yourself from the world to get this practice going. And then once you feel like you're proficient enough, then return to the world. Like that's kind of not how this works. And it's called a practice for a reason. If you were there, you wouldn't need to do it yet. You know.
As Snow calls us all out, meditation is definitely something that I struggle with the perfectionist component of it's not the right time, but then it's never going to be the right time. And that's the point of meditation is learning to do it when it's not the right time. So that you have a better grasp on your own faculties when times are more strenuous.
There's a Nepalese Buddhist monk called Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, and he's done some books. He's been to the States and had all the kind of neural experiments and stuff they do when they look at the prolonged long-term effects of meditation and things like that. And he does all these talks where he says, basically, don't think about meditation as meditation. Just think of it as you're sitting down and you're sighing because you're comfy and relaxing in your seat. And if that's your starting point, then that's great. And just do that, and then do that again, and then do that more regularly, you know. Because he's done talks with people where he'll say, all right, everyone just, you know, just sit and chill. And they do, and everyone's fine. And he goes, right, and now we're going to meditate. And all of a sudden, everyone tenses up and they hold their breath and their breathing's not right. And they're all stiff and awkward and fidgety and looking around. And they're all going, am I doing this right? And he's like, the first time you were all meditating, but when I called it meditating, all of a sudden it all went out the window.
That's a very good point. What about you, Saranth? I know you've been meditating more. How is that? How is that working out for you?
So it's been really good actually. Between the taking time out, mostly I'm doing this at work because it's where I'm up and awake and able to not fall asleep while I'm trying to meditate. Which was a pain in the butt when I was trying to do meditation at home, especially when I first would get home. Meditation would relax me so much I'd be zonked. So doing meditation at work has made me more calm at work because I live in a reactive atmosphere while I'm there. You know, sometimes it's like, okay, be ready to move at any given moment. And the meditation work kind of takes the edge off the anxiety that I feel just walking in the building. It also really it puts me into a focus that is less concerned about results as process. So I have been like really on, like, I want to do 500 words a day. I want to do 500 words a day. Well, cool. I'm now at 95,500 words. I need alpha readers at this point. So I've asked a bunch of folks to look at the doc. And I used to really have an issue with, okay, I got to take my hands off the wheel now and I got to just be patient and wait for people to show up when they can. Are they going to think this is crap? Da 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 da. You know, all the stuff that when you're putting something out into the world, you think of. I mean, even though it's not published yet, it's nowhere near ready for publication. You know, and initially, the first couple of days after, I had really bad anxiety about that. But as I was really glomming into my meditation practice, a lot of that kind of fell away because it's really not important. Because I've got to be able to trust that I've done as much work as I can at this point, and doing any more work at this point is just going to kind of lose the plot, as it were, even though it's a nonfiction book. I have done as much process of writing this that I can part of the moment without more guidance, and I need to just chill. And meditation kind of like brought me to this place of, is this actually worth the energy you're expending? And the answer is no. And so, on the one hand, focus, on the other hand, this letting go of extraneous uses of energy so that what I do actually want to concentrate on, I can. So, to be clear, the kind of meditation I'm practicing is not no mind. I find those incredibly ascetic, and I don't recommend them for most people, and generally speaking, especially without an elder or somebody who is initiated in knowing what they're doing, because of how fucked up it can make you if you do it the wrong way. I've hit no mind a couple of times. It's not a place I like to be. It's probably not a place you should want to stay. But given I have ADHD, it's also really, really, really hard to hit that spot. And so it's not a place that I go when I meditate. When I meditate, I'm concentrating on my breathing. I am being present with my body. I am allowing the breath to carry the energy through me and out. And it's less about what I'm experiencing as I'm meditating and more just being present, being bodily, spiritually, mentally present. When I have, and given I have ADHD, if I am doing a sitting down meditation or I'm doing it for a period of time, thoughts are going to happen, and there is no point getting ornery about that. I know something that I've read from a lot of people who meditate, both Buddhist monks and otherwise. There is no point in worrying about the thoughts that come up. You just acknowledge them and let them go, because they happen even for people who do this all the fucking time. Because we have bodies. We are body bound for a reason. And your body is continuously providing you stimulus and providing you information. And meditation is a time to kind of set that shit aside, even if you need to be somewhat aware, which, you know, I'm meditating at work. I've got to be somewhat aware. It's not like I can just disappear inside myself and just cut the world off. That's not what this kind of meditation is about anyway. So I hope that helps. I feel like I've rambled a bit.
I find it really interesting that you brought up the writing of your book and how that process has gone from wanting to get the 500 words a day to now setting it aside and waiting for feedback and focusing on other things. And I think how we choose and when we choose to do ritual can go through cycles like that, where during one part of your life, you might be doing ritual according to the wheel of the year and the new and full moons, or specific holidays according to your practice. And then when maybe a different part of your life changes, how you choose to do ritual or when you choose to do ritual might shift as well. And that doesn't make it better or worse. It's just you recognizing a need to shift with how the rest of your life has shifts and finding ways to implement that in a way that works for you. So I find that how your book writing has been going and shifting from that to the next stage of the cycle to be very interesting and to be a really good example of how people's just spiritual practices can shift too.
I mean, I think a key part of a lot of this is that it's about the journey. It's about the journey of writing the book. It's about the journey of a meditation practice. It's about the journey of your religious practice and doing these rituals. I mean, I recently on my site published a blog post talking about sort of love and romance and relationships. And a friend of ours a while back, Grimchild, got married, and she wrote a blog post talking about how it is about the journey. If you view it as a series of goals, a series of destinations, you get to those, and there's always that degree of disappointment because there's that empty kind of, well, what now? Whereas if it's the journey and it's all ongoing, and you maybe just have these kind of distance markers along the way, you're ongoing, you're working at it. And I think that is a much healthier and a much more sort of beneficial way of viewing it. And that crosses over to other things like you're writing the book, like a meditation practice, like you're doing rituals in your religious work.
Yeah, I really like looking at that, focusing on the journey as opposed to the goals or the destinations. Whether I always am able to put my focus on the journey as opposed to the goals, it depends. But I know I get a lot more out of things when I do it that way. Which I think is why I appreciate times like New Year's, New Beginnings, and like Mercury retrograde, because those for me are times to see how my journey can shift to be more in alignment with how I'm doing now in that moment. Like there's at least probably 3 times a year where I celebrate a New Year's of a sort. And for me, that's just a way to realign things at that point in time. It doesn't mean that the old way was. Yeah. There are other days for that, but they are also very appreciated celebrations.
I think for me, like one of the other things that meditation's kind of brought forward is yes, it's about the process. And applying that with regards to my writing has also been shifting gears between fiction and nonfiction writing, because the fiction writing that I'm doing right now is I'm developing Shadowrun stuff. So I really deeply enjoy that setting, and I really deeply enjoy the character creation process and setting creation. So I've been leaning into the stuff that is making me enjoy the process, which has also been something about the meditation work this time around that has been very different. Is my meditation process this time around is a lot less goal oriented than what my previous ones were. So previously it was stare at a dot on the wall and then being able to recreate the dot in your head and then being able to expand the dot, a lot of the classic ceremonial magic / chaos magic stuff that I used to do when I was much younger, which has its place and is very useful. Like, I'm not knocking goal-oriented meditation or ritual practice, but a lot of my religious and writing work has shifted focus dramatically from, okay, I can get these repetitive results, no problem. Great. How do I apply this in a more broad perspective, as opposed to I want to cast this triangle of art and summon something into it? So I think part of why I'm much more comfortable going away from goals-oriented meditation and ritual work is because I've done enough of it to where I know that if I have a need, I can put forward some effort and get things done. And I think it's just a question of where I'm at this point. And I think that's something that everybody comes to. If you put enough work in on a given article, a given item, a given thing, a given path, you're going to hit a point where you know enough to know that you've got this down, and you can explore in different ways that have nothing to do with point A to point B. And you can take a much more leisurely trip when you can confidently say, yes, I know how to drive this car from point A to point B. Otherwise, you're white knuckling the whole way going, where's my turn? Where's my turn? Where's my turn? You know.
I mean, I'm sorry.
It's cool. I just was going to say, just finishing up, it's just part of the process, I think, of just becoming competent and becoming comfortable.
I was thinking, I think an elephant in the room that I'm starting to notice is that when it comes to these kinds of things, meditation, astrology, heathenry, all these kinds of things that we're working with, working in, working around, a big appeal for that is that it is that deviation from the overculture's norm in the mainstream society, where we here in the sort of quote unquote developed West live in a world that is very goal oriented. Everything is judged and graded and marked by the results it produces, whether that's product coming out of a factory line or whether that's product in the sense of you have a piece of paper with a very high letter on it, or you have a bank statement with a lot of zeros on the preferable end. It's all about results. And so that's being furthered by sort of all the stuff on, people talking about things on social media and whatnot, sort of we got to get as many likes as possible, get as many views as possible, all those kinds of things. So I think people coming to these things, viewing the journey, can be really difficult because it's such a big transition from that way of thinking. But it is a momentary escape from that and a time to sort of chill and be in the moment and develop in other ways rather than blinkered focus on whatever target you're being presented or whatever target you're being told to shoot for.
Yeah.
I do think goals can be useful for orientation and kind of like which direction you want to go. But I think the big value is in not tying yourself too tightly to those and letting them shift as need be. And as you approach them, still being able to recognize the joys or the experiences on the way. I know for me, I tend to at times shy away from goals because of the perfectionism. And I realize that when I do that, I end up floating without really any direction. And so for me, I am working on having a direction without over investing in the end point. Because if you go in a general direction, you never know what other options are going to open up as you get closer, and allowing yourself to be aware of that helps to bring you to other things that you had no idea were even opportunities. Now I have rambled.
I like it though, because like I think there's a point in developing core competencies, whether it's regards to driving a car or engaging with your religion or doing a magical practice, meditating, whatever. I think I've kind of feel like a middle road here, or at least some of column A, some of column B. Because having the goal-oriented perspective isn't the problem in and of itself. It's when it becomes the only thing, when it overrides your sense of connection, or when it overrides your sense of development, or when it overrides your sense of just being in space with these gods, ancestors, and spirits. I think that if all you're looking for is results, that's a choice. But I think that there's a depth of relationship that you can get to where that will be an active impediment if you don't give yourself the space to breathe. So like when we're brewing mead, you have to have some headroom, because if you don't, it's gonna, the product's gonna shoot out the top of the airlock and you're gonna fucking ruin your mead. You have to give the mead some headroom in order for it to breathe, in order for the yeast to be able to develop, in order for the brew to be able to clarify. You've got to have some space in there. And to my mind, anyway, folks who fill their lives with it's all goals all the time aren't leaving any headroom, and they explode, sometimes in a really grand fashion.
Well, and I think when you hyper focus on specific goals, again, it's really easy to miss all of the things that you've never even considered. Whereas if you're loosely focused on goals, but more focused on the journey, you can be more aware of these paths that you might not have even known existed.
I mean, I do see I mean, if we're talking in terms of magical works, a lot of people will say, well, it's about the results you get. And sometimes they will, depending on the framework they're working in, the tradition, etc., will maybe dismiss convention, dismiss any ethical framework because they are so focused on getting those results. And a lot of the times, the way that you measure the proficiency or competency of someone's magical working, whether it's witchcraft or high ceremonial Solomonic stuff or whatever, is did you get the results? Did it go how you intended? That kind of thing. But I still think, even with that, having those relationships between the practitioner and their tools, the practitioner and whatever divinities, gods, spirits they're working with, angels, whatever, is going to be beneficial to that and is going to help with getting those results. Now, obviously, as with anything like this, you're always going to get the people who they just want to do just enough to get the thing done, and then they got to go cook food for the kids and go to work tomorrow morning.
Right.
And so they're not sitting around contemplating, the deep theologies of the ritual they're doing, or working on the, getting to know each individual spirit they're calling upon for their ritual or whatever. And that's fine. And that's down to individuals' needs, wants, etc.
Yeah. I think that there's some kind of balance if to be struck between I am going to really focus on bringing these results. And I mean, like, if you're doing magic and you need the money and you need it like yesterday, there is absolutely nothing wrong with really like digging deep and going whole ham on I have to have fucking results. Hell or high water. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. But there's also it's a question of focus, and it's a question of what it is you're actually trying to do and what it is you need to do. What obligations do you have? A lot of the refrains that I have in a lot of my articles are, what are your obligations? What are your responsibilities? What is your framework for this? A lot of that comes down to, how you interface with the religion, the magical practice, etc. And if you're in a position where you have to have magical results, as a spirit worker, I have to be able to put down runes and divine. It's my job. But in outside of those goal-oriented times, a lot of my relationship with the Gindragon, the gods, the ancestors, and the Vaethir is mine. Is just that, right? And so goal orientation in that particular sense may not make a lot of sense, because like we're just existing. Right? And so a lot of this connective work may not actually have a goal of even deepening the relationship. It's just I'm connecting. Or, if I'm meditating because I deserve peace of mind. And that might be the only thing that's bouncing around in there while I'm doing it.
Well, and I think that's too where priorities come into play. Like for me, the relationships with my spirits are high priority because I notice them and they affect me greatly. And for other people, those relationships might be less of a priority than doing ritual with the community, whether or not they have the relationships with specific spirits. Having like community time might be their top priority. So they're going to schedule things around that. So I think priorities are a factor. And to me, I kind of see maintaining and feeding the relationships with my spirits as kind of a goal of sorts. Like it's both a journey and a goal. But it's a high priority for me because of how it affects my life.
I mean, I suppose there is also the reality that in a relationship, yes, it's the journey and it is having that relationship, working on it, it's growing, and but you're also wanting to get something out of it, and you're wanting the other person to get something out of it. So there is a degree of an outcome there, whether that's incidental or whether that's explicitly planned for. I think that there is the point that is inevitably a factor.
And I mean, if we're understanding a lot of this as, this is not a one-sided relationship, clearly. There's at least one other being in this relationship besides ourselves. Does the ritual timing matter? Well, it may not matter to us as fleshbound people, but it might matter to the spirits involved. Does the calendar or the holidays or the things you're doing as prep work matter? It might not to us, but again, this is, I think, something that Emily picked up on with priorities and all that. And the question of like locale, how you do it, where you do it, a lot of that is, it flows out of those answers, right? And so, like, when we kind of bringing the eclipse back into this, like when we're asking questions about how we relate to the eclipse and what it means to us and all that, clearly we have all the different ways of relating possible, but how we relate to the eclipse, how we relate to that phenomena can matter a great deal differently depending on who you're asking, even within the exact same region, exact same religion, right?
So we have been going for about an hour and a half. That flew by.
Quickly too.
Yeah. Do we reckon we have a show?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. Cool. So Cabra isn't here. Cabra is at steelcitywitch.wordpress.com. If you want more of Cabra's things, go check it out. They have good stuff there. Emily, where can we find you and your stuff?
I am at streakingfate.wordpress.com.
So, all right, fine. You can find me at patreon.com/Sarth Odinson if you want to have me write you a prayer or a topic, or if you wish to schedule a rune reading. You can find me there. You can also find my blog work at sarth.wordpress.com, and you can also find me on YouTube co-hosting Three Pagans on Tap with Malik Odinson.
Snow, where can we find you?
You can find all of my stuff at linktree/snowthegoth. Everything is there, from all the things that I'm part of, my blog, my writing, my music, everything is there. If you want to support the show, we are very grateful. Patreon.com/AroundGrandfatherFire. You can get involved there. You can come join our Discord server. You don't have to be on the Patreon to join our Discord server. It's not Patreon locked. Depending on what tier you go for on the Patreon, you may get unedited episodes with extra footage, and you might even be able to get to join us live in the Zoom call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really appreciate the people who have shown up this evening to join us and listen to us live. So with all of that being said, thank you all of you for joining us, and we will see you next time around the fire.